Hello, everybody. Continuing our journey into the squishiness that is the brain. All right, so today we'll talk about the basal ganglia and the hypothalamus. Basal ganglia, you get a whole bunch of notes there in your page, and a lot of it we'll come back to. There's already a lot of stuff we're doing, so let me just give you the big picture. The basal ganglia is for movement. There's a lot of parts of the brain that are for movement. So we have the central gyrus, Brodmann's area 4. We have the cerebellum, and we have the basal ganglia. So basal ganglia is more for making movement nice. It helps start it and stop it and make it smooth. It regulates the intensity of the movements and inhibits unnecessary movements. And to remember this, remember that Parkinson's disease is a disorder of the basal ganglia. So with Parkinson's, you have slow movements, stiff, you got that unnecessary tremor. Huntington's is also a disorder in the basal ganglia, and you'll have these wild swinging motions. So they're not paralyzed with either of those diseases, but it's you don't have the nice, easy movement. So the basal ganglia helps with that. Basal ganglia also helps with overlearned sensory motor pathways. What that is when you have some movements that when you first learn them, you were very conscious of how you're typing or playing the piano or playing tennis or driving, but then it becomes a habit and you just go blah, 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 blah. You just drive. You're kind of on autopilot. You don't have to think about how to turn the wheel and how hard to push on the gas. When you're typing, your fingers just go. You play an instrument, you don't have to think about it as much. And basal ganglia plays a role in that. Also plays a role in emotions and mood. And OCD actually kind of lives in the basal ganglia as well. Now, there are a lot of parts of the basal ganglia, and those are listed below in the anatomy. So there's the caudate and putamen. Together we call this the striatum. We have the globus pallidus, the substantia nigra, the subthalamic nuclei, the ventrolateral thalamus, which we'll talk about in the next video, and then all this connects to the cortex. And there's direct and indirect pathways, and some pathways are excitatory and some are inhibitory. Don't worry about it. We will cover this later in the next section, section 3 of neuroscience. We will go through all these connections and what turns on what and what does what. But for this test, no, let it go. I just kind of put this up here as a scary preview of coming attractions. So we'll cover this later. But what I do want you to know is what the functions of the basal ganglia are. The anatomy and the connections, do not worry about them for this test, but do know the functions. All right, the limbic system. All right, there's a whole bunch of different components of the limbic system. The limbic system is involved with emotions and memory. And the parts of it are the hippocampus. Hippocampus is largely for memory. The amygdala, which is fear and rage, anxiety. Hypothalamus, we'll spend some time with that. The fornix is a connection, a series of nerves that connect the hypothalamus to the hippocampus. The cingulate gyrus plays a role with social emotions and many things. Septal nuclei, and these all connect with the olfactory centers and the cortex. And the main functions of the limbic system, emotions and memory. Okay, specifically aggression and fear are in there too, but emotions and memory are how we simplify the functions of the limbic system. All right, so the telencephalon, we are now finished. Telencephalon is the cortex and the basal ganglia and parts of the limbic system, but we are now going to dive into the diencephalon. The diencephalon right here, which includes the hypothalamus, the thalamus, the pineal gland, and some people consider the pituitary glands in there as well, but not everybody. So what we're going to do for the rest of this video is talk about the hypothalamus, and we'll get to the other parts of the diencephalon later. So the hypothalamus, what are the functions? And it's like here, neuroscientists, we don't have a lot of jokes. We have the one neuroscience joke we have. It said the functions of the hypothalamus are the 4 F's: fighting, fleeing, feeding, and mating. Anyway, yeah, it's involved with many things. So let's go over the functions of the hypothalamus. Now, hypothalamus is this, you have one pea-sized little gland, but it is the master gland. It controls so many things. So here are some of the functions of the hypothalamus. Integration of the autonomic nervous system. What I mean by that is it helps regulate the autonomic nervous system. Remember, that's the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. So it's going to get signals from the body going to the brain and from the brain going back to the body, and it's going to help regulate blood pressure, heart rate, respiratory rate. TB is body temperature, diameter of your pupils, all these things. It's going to help regulate and integrate information back and forth for the autonomic nervous system. Hypothalamus is involved with emotions and behavior. How are these emotions manifested through your body, through the autonomic nervous system? So what does pain do physically? How's your heart rate? How's your sweating? With pleasure, fear, sex, reward, how are all those activities and emotions, how do they show up in your body? So what is going on with your heart rate and respiratory rate and blood pressure with these emotions? All right, hypothalamus also helps regulate homeostatic conditions. It helps play a role related to the autonomic nervous system of body temperature. How hungry are you? Appetite lives there. How thirsty are you? How's your sleep? Sex drive is there. Addiction is there. A lot of things live there. Part of addiction. And it's an endocrine gland itself. So hypothalamus is going to produce ADH and oxytocin and then send them on to the posterior pituitary gland. And it is involved in regulating the release and synthesis of hormones like FSH and LH and growth hormone and all of those hormones. So endocrine function, regulating homeostatic conditions, manifesting the way that emotions show up in your body, helping to control the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. A lot of things controlled by the hypothalamus. And there are a lot of connections. Things that are connected to the hypothalamus, the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is very important for memory and emotions. It's related to interactions of emotion and memory. It also, they've recently learned, it helps keep track of other people's movements. It's kind of like a marauder's map for any Harry Potter fans. It's like a little map of where this person is moving. So that's hippocampus, but mostly memory is what we think of it. The amygdala. Amygdala, we think of this as fear, rage, anxiety. And so it's going to give us defense reactions like, oh, I saw a snake. Or it's learned fear goes through the amygdala. And recognizing animals. So there are neurons in there that specifically recognize specific animals. And maybe that's related to recognizing a snake or a spider, which can be poisonous, toxic, I think is the word. No, venomous snakes, not poisonous, venomous snakes. And so you have to recognize them and show fear. The retinohypothalamic tract. That comes from the retina to a part of the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. So this is going to be how we respond to light cycles. This is how light affects our circadian rhythms, because light comes in through the retina and goes to the hypothalamus and helps control sleep and appetite and mood based on light cycles. That's part of where seasonal affective disorder comes from. Let's see, there's a pathway connection from the hypothalamus to the posterior pituitary. It's called a hypophyseal tract, hypothalamic hypophyseal tract. So hypothalamic going to the hypothalamus, going to the posterior pituitary to transport oxytocin and vasopressin. Mammillary bodies are there. They connect. It's for memory. And then finally, the medial forebrain bundle. That's what we'll talk about later in the semester, but it's part of the lateral hypothalamus. It's a dopaminergic pathway. It's involved with pleasure and addiction. So what we're going to do now, we are going to look specifically at the anatomy in the hypothalamus. We're going to look at the different nuclei in the hypothalamus and look at the different nuclei And I want you to know where they are, what region they're in. There's 4 different regions. What is the name of the nucleus and what is its function? There's a lot to learn. It's neuroscience. All right, so the first region is called the preoptic region. And this largely controls 2 things, sex and thermoregulation. So the hormone GnRH, gonadotropin releasing hormone, is produced in something called in the preoptic region. And we also call it the sexually dimorphic nucleus because this region, the preoptic nuclei, is 5 to 10 times larger in males than it is in females. It has a lot of testosterone receptors, and it's associated with libido. You need testosterone for it to develop, and females have testosterone too, but it's larger in males. And it helps produce the GnRH that you need to release FSH and LH and the whole sex reproduction pathway. Preoptic region also is involved with thermoregulation. It's for heat loss, to cool down the body, and fluid regulation. So that's the preoptic region. The supraoptic region has 4 nuclei in it. Right? So supraoptic, paraventricular, anterior, and suprachiasmatic. Those are the 4 nuclei in the supraoptic region. But let's go by function. One of the functions of the supraoptic region is production of oxytocin and vasopressin. And we make these hormones in these 2 nuclei, the supraoptic nuclei and the paraventricular nuclei. Another function of the supraoptic region is parasympathetic responses and also thermoregulation. So parasympathetic, the anterior hypothalamus is going to send signals down from the hypothalamus to slow down heart rate, to decrease sweating, to do all of that. And so it's also involved with cooling down your body. So it's not going to decrease sweating, cooling your body. So thermoregulation, cooling your body, and parasympathetic to reduce your heart rate and increase GI secretions. Okay, so I said it incorrectly wrong with the thermoregulation before. It cools your body. All right. Last function in the supraoptic region is one of your biological clocks. You have a couple, but one of them is to control circadian rhythms. It's the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and it's going to get signals from the retina and help control your biological clock for sleep, for appetite, for mood. Third region of the hypothalamus is called the tuberal region. And there's 1, 2, 3 areas in here, 1, 2, 3 nuclei, the ventromedial nuclei, dorsomedial, and arcuate nucleus. The functions in the tuberal region: hunger and emotions. All right, so ventromedial nucleus is to calm you down. All right, so this one is going to calm you down and it makes you feel full. Right? It makes sense these go together. If you destroy it, if there's destruction of the ventromedial nucleus, you're raged and you're hungry. This is hangry. This is your hangry nucleus. So if you destroy it. So if you destroy it, you're angry and you're hungry. But normally the ventromedial nucleus helps you keep calm and satiated so you're not hungry. All right. And the way I think of this is ventral. The ventral part is towards your tummy. So that's where hunger is. Dorsomedial nucleus also controls emotions. If you stimulate this one, it leads to rage. And the way I remember this one is dorsal fin, like a shark. Think of angry sharks. So stimulating this one can lead to rage. If you lesion it, it leads to calm. And then there's the arcuate nucleus, and that is going to be fibers that lead to the anterior pituitary. It tells the anterior pituitary, for instance, to control its release of prolactin or growth hormone. So it helps control release from the anterior pituitary. The last region is the mammillary region. Only 2 nuclei here, the mammillary bodies and the posterior hypothalamus. Mammillary bodies are there to help integrate information coming in from a memory, from emotions and memory, from the limbic system. Helps you remember emotional things. And the posterior hypothalamus is for sympathetic nervous system and also thermoregulation. It's going to make heat. It's going to make you shiver, so you're producing heat, and it's going to increase your heart rate and decreased GI secretions. Okay, so the way we've looked at it now, we looked at it by region and function. This isn't in your notes because it's hard to find a nice picture. So, but here's the region, the preoptic region, and I'm going to review this a few times, and we'll have an activity as well. This is the supraoptic region with its 4 nuclei. Here is the tuberal region with its 3 nuclei, and then the mammillary region has these 2 nuclei. So let's go through it and review it again. Now I just drew it in PowerPoint, you'll see, but you still have these pictures in your notes to refer back to. So preoptic region, we're just going to review this. Preoptic region, 2 main functions. One is for thermoregulation, it's for heat loss, cooling down the body. And this is the one control sex. Preoptic nuclei is going to be your sexually dimorphic nucleus. It produces GnRH. So preoptic nuclei, sexually dimorphic nucleus, it's bigger in males, and it produces GnRH, and it helps cool down the body. It's the preoptic nuclei. Next is the supraoptic region. So let's look at it nuclei by nuclei. The paraventricular and the supraoptic nuclei, both of those do the same thing. They produce oxytocin and vasopressin. The anterior pituitary is related to your parasympathetic system. I just think of an A and an A, parasympathetic anterior. I don't know. If you find a better way, let me know. And so this one is going to decrease your heart rate and increase GI secretions. And it's also involved with temperature. It's going to cool down the body. And finally, suprachiasmatic nucleus. That's one of your biological clocks. It's going to help control your circadian rhythms. Tuberal region, 1, 2, 3. Dorsomedial, involved with emotions. Think dorsal fin. The shark is angry. You stimulate this one, it leads to rage. Ventromedial, think tummy. It's towards the ventral area. That is going to be, if you're stimulating that, okay, I'm calm, I'm full and happy. If you lesion it, I'm angry, I'm hungry and angry. But if it's normal stimulation, it's calm and full. Arcuate, that's going to be fibers that go to the anterior pituitary to help control release of for instance, prolactin. And then finally, the mammillary region, posterior nuclei. There's an S in there, sympathetic nervous system. So that's going to stimulate increasing your heart rate and decreasing GI, and it produces heat. And then the mammillary bodies is related to memory and integrating information coming from emotions and memory, coming from the limbic system. And just as a brief review, because you can look at it as what is the function of the nuclei, or what are the functions and which nuclei cover it. So just to have this here again, preoptic region, right here. That's just the preoptic nuclei. It's involved with making GnRH and thermoregulation. It's going to cool the body. Supraoptic region, these 4. The functions, paraventricular and supraoptic, are going to make oxytocin and vasopressin. The parasympathetic nuclei, that's going to, the anterior nuclei, that's going to stimulate parasympathetic, so lower heart rate and raise GI. And it's going to cool the body as well. So does this one. These 2 cool the body. And then the suprachiasmatic nucleus, that is one of your biological clocks. All right, these here in gray, this is the tuberal region. We have the dorsomedial, that's going to be related to rage. The ventromedial, that's going to be if you're calm and you're not hungry. And then the arcuate is going to send signals to the anterior pituitary. See, right there. And mammillary bodies, mammillary bodies are involved with integrating information from limbic system. And see, here's the fornix, there's pathways there leading from the limbic system here. And the posterior nucleus is involved with sympathetic response, raising your heart rate, and making heat. All right, a lot of nuclei, a lot to remember, but on Canvas, I'm going to post a matching activity. We're going to have activities to review this in Zoom. But so I will want you to know what the nucleus is and what it does. All right, let's close this one out.